The auditorium was silent. You could hear the ticking of the large clock hanging above the stage. Rows of metal chairs creaked as students leaned forward, holding their breath. Every teacher, every parent, every administrator from 10 different schools sat still, eyes fixed on the tiny boy standing alone under the spotlight. 11-year-old Elijah Carter stood at the microphone, gripping the sides of the wooden podium with shaking hands. A single drop of sweat slid down his forehead, but his dark brown eyes were calm, focused. Elijah Carter, from Willow Ridge Public School, you have 60 seconds. Final question, said the announcer, a tall man in a blue blazer who hadn't smiled once all day. Solve for x. If 5x minus 7 equals 3x plus 9, what is x? A murmur ran through the room. It was one of the hardest algebra questions in the state finals for the under-12 division. Most kids would have frozen, some already had. But Elijah didn't blink. His fingers moved quickly through the air, like he was drawing invisible numbers. You could almost hear him whispering the math: 5x, 7, shakers, 3x, plus, 9, subtract 3x from both sides, 2x, 7, 9, add 7 to both sides, 2x, 16, x over 8. Then, softly but clearly, he spoke. X equals 8. Silence. Then the buzzer rang. A beat passed. Then another. The blue blazer announcer looked toward the judges. One of them gave a sharp nod. That is correct. The room exploded into applause. Students clapped. Parents stood to cheer. Teachers beamed with pride. Some even wiped tears from their eyes. The math final was over. And Elijah Carter, young, quiet, polite Elijah with oversized glasses and a too-small blazer, had just won the entire district's math competition. But not everyone was happy. Standing off to the side near the trophy table, Miss Roberta Langston, a tall, blonde substitute teacher from Kensington Prep, crossed her arms tightly across her chest. Her mouth curled downward in disapproval. She looked around the room at the celebration, her lips moving slightly like she was counting how many white students had just been beaten by the small black boy from the public school. And then she did something no one expected. She walked onto the stage. Elijah had just stepped down and was being hugged by his best friend David and his math teacher, Mrs. Emery, when Miss Langston tapped the announcer on the arm and whispered something. The announcer's eyebrows lifted in confusion. He frowned. "Are you sure?" he whispered back. But Miss Langston nodded. The announcer cleared his throat and returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to pause for a moment. A concern has been raised about the integrity of the final round." The room hushed instantly. "What?" Mrs. Emery whispered, her face going pale. "What do they mean? Concern?" Miss Langston stepped forward and took the microphone. Her voice rang through the room, clear and sharp like cold glass. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe there's been a mistake," she said. "This child," she gestured toward Elijah, "could not possibly have answered that. Final question without assistance. I suspect he cheated." The entire auditorium gasped. Mrs. Emery stumbled forward. "That's outrageous. Elijah didn't cheat. He's the brightest student I've had in 10 years. Miss Langston ignored her. "No child solves an equation like that so quickly without memorization or unauthorized help. I've seen enough. Competitions to know the difference between real talent and rehearsed performance. This," she paused dramatically, "was not earned." Elijah stood frozen near the edge of the stage. He didn't understand what was happening. One moment he was being hugged and celebrated, and the next, a grown-up he didn't even know was accusing him of cheating. His hands dropped to his sides. His voice stuck in his throat. Mrs. Emery moved in front of him, protective like a mother, shielding her cub. "This is unacceptable," she snapped. "He's been practicing with me every afternoon for weeks. He solved harder equations than that just yesterday in the classroom." But Miss Langston wasn't finished. I demand a review of his test sheet and a re-evaluation of his answers. Perhaps even a retest. I have students who worked their hearts out and followed every rule. It's not fair to them. A few people in the crowd nodded quietly. Parents from Kensington Prep. Another teacher in a red scarf from an elite private school. Whispers started floating from seat to seat. Maybe she's right. How can a public school kid be that fast? Did you see him? He didn't even write anything down. Elijah stood still, blinking back tears, feeling the joy of the moment drain from his body like air escaping a balloon. He looked for Mrs. Emery, but she was too busy arguing with the judges. He looked for David, but he'd stepped back, unsure of what to do. Then he looked toward the back of the auditorium, where the parents were sitting, and remembered. His father wasn't there. He'd said he couldn't make it. He had a meeting at City Hall, something big, something that couldn't be missed. Elijah had smiled and said it was okay, but right now, all he wanted was his dad. Miss Langston continued. I request he be disqualified until a full investigation is complete. A judge stood. Miss Langston, this is highly irregular. There's no formal complaint process in place. Then start one, she barked. The announcer looked shaken. The joy in the room had turned to confusion, then anger. A parent shouted, Let the kid have his win. Someone else whispered, This would never happen if he looked like one of their boys. Elijah sat down quietly in the corner of the stage. No one told him to, but he didn't want to stand anymore. He felt small again, like when he used to get teased on the bus for wearing hand-me-down sneakers, like when other kids called him teacher's pet because he liked reading books in the library instead of playing dodgeball. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. It was of him and his dad at the Science Museum. They were both smiling, holding foam airplanes. His dad had written a note on the back in blue pen. You're the smartest kid I know. Never forget that. Dad. His fingers shook as he held it. He needed to call his dad, but he didn't have a phone. His dad didn't let him bring it to school. Focus on the learning, he'd always say. I'll always be one phone call away. Elijah looked up as a shadow fell across him. Miss Langston had walked over, arms crossed, her voice lower now, but sharp as ever. You don't have to be scared, she said. But people like you don't get ahead by skipping the line. You understand? Elijah blinked. What did she mean? People like you. Miss Langston crouched down, her face right at eye level. There's a system. There's a process. You can't just show up and outsmart the rest. It makes people uncomfortable, and when people get uncomfortable, rules get checked. She stood and turned back toward the judges. Elijah clutched the photo in his hand so tightly it crumpled. From the side of the stage, Mrs. Emery returned. She looked furious. She knelt next to Elijah and whispered, I'm going to fix this. I'm calling your father. Right now. Elijah didn't speak. He only nodded, because something deep inside him knew. Once his father knew what was happening, nothing would ever be the same. The auditorium lights still burned hot above the stage, casting long shadows across the floor. But the warmth and applause from earlier had been replaced by a heavy silence, one that felt sharp, like it could cut skin. Elijah sat quietly on the edge of the stage, his back hunched, arms around his knees, while the judges whispered to each other behind a long wooden table. The math trophy, which had been placed proudly in front of them just minutes ago, now sat off to the side, forgotten. It looked cold and distant, like it belonged to someone else. Across the room, parents and teachers fidgeted in their seats. Some whispered. Some just stared at the small boy on the stage who had gone from celebrated champion to accused cheater in the time it takes to tie a shoelace. The mood was strange, uncomfortable, like everyone knew what was happening was wrong, but no one knew how to stop it. No one except Elijah's father. But he wasn't here yet. At the judges' table, Mr. Holloway, a silver-haired man with tired eyes and a reputation for being by the book, cleared his throat and stood. He was the lead official for the regional math championship, and everyone in the room knew he took his job seriously. "We've received a formal concern from Miss Langston of Kensington Prep," he said slowly, choosing each word like he was defusing a bomb. "She claims that the final answer given by Mr. Elijah Carter was suspiciously accurate. Suspiciously accurate, as if being right was somehow wrong when it came from the wrong person." Mrs. Emery stood, her hands trembling. "Are we really doing this?" she said loudly. "This boy just beat every other finalist with grace and talent. Now he's being punished for it? Because of a hunch?" Miss Langston, who sat 2 rows behind the judges, leaned back in her chair smugly, arms crossed like she had already won. "I simply asked for a review," she said innocently. "Isn't fairness part of academic integrity?" Mrs. Emery scoffed. "You didn't ask. You accused. And you did it in front of every student here." Mr. Holloway sighed and rubbed his forehead. He was under pressure. The school board representatives were in the audience, principals, donors. He couldn't just ignore a formal challenge, especially one that had now been made so publicly. "Elijah Carter," he said, turning to the boy on the stage, "you will need to come back up and retake the final question, this time with pencil and paper. We will monitor closely." The gasps were audible. Even some of the judges looked uncomfortable. The rules never stated that a winner could be forced to redo a question, but the room had already been poisoned by doubt. Elijah rose slowly, like the air had become thicker. He took the paper and pencil handed to him and walked to the center of the stage again. His small sneakers squeaked against the wooden floor. "Same question?" he asked softly. Mr. Holloway nodded. "Same question. Solve for x, 5x, 7 re 3x, plus 9. Elijah nodded and looked down at the paper. But the pressure wasn't the same now. The first time, it had been excitement. Now it was humiliation. His hands trembled. He could feel every eye in the room burning into his skin. He felt like he was drowning, like he was swimming in a sea of whispers, stares, and unspoken judgments. He wrote the steps carefully. 7, 3x plus 9, subtract 3x from both sides. 2x, 7, 9, add 7 to both sides. 2x, 16, divide by 2. X, 8. He circled the answer. Then he looked up. "Finished," he said quietly. Mr. Holloway took the paper. He didn't even check it himself. He passed it to the judge sitting next to him, who nodded immediately. "Correct." And yet no one clapped. There was no cheering this time, no high fives, no proud teachers or teary-eyed parents. It was quiet, uncomfortably, painfully quiet. Elijah handed the pencil back and sat again. His fingers were cold. He stared at the floor. The joy he had felt earlier was gone. It had been crushed under the weight of one person's bias and everyone else's silence. Then behind him, the doors to the auditorium opened. Heavy, fast footsteps echoed across the polished tile floor. The doors slammed shut. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit strode down the aisle. His shoulders were broad, his expression unreadable. His tie was still slightly loosened from work, and his eyes scanned the room like a radar. Dr. Henry Carter had arrived. Elijah looked up and saw his father, and suddenly, the tears he had been holding back came loose. "Dad," he whispered, standing. "Doctor." Carter didn't speak as he walked up the steps to the stage. He went straight to his son, placed a hand gently on his shoulder, and leaned down. "Are you okay?" he asked. Elijah nodded, but the tears betrayed him. "No," he said quietly. "They said I cheated." Dr. Carter looked up sharply. He turned to face the judges. "My name is Dr. Henry Carter," he said firmly. "I'm Elijah's father, and someone's going to explain to me why my son, after solving a math problem correctly in front of hundreds, of witnesses, was accused of cheating and forced to solve it again like a criminal. Mr. Holloway opened his mouth, but Dr. Carter continued before he could respond. Is it because he didn't use a calculator? Because he didn't need scratch paper? Or is it because my son, a young black boy from a public school, beat your top students and made people uncomfortable? A hush fell over the auditorium. Miss Langston stood. Sir, this isn't personal. We're just ensuring academic fairness. No, Dr. Carter said, his voice cold now. What you did was drag an 11-year-old child through public humiliation without any evidence. You didn't ask him if he cheated. You didn't pull him aside. You accused him in front of hundreds of people. You made him feel small, and you made this moment, what should have been one of the proudest of his life, feel like a courtroom trial. He turned to the audience. My son didn't just solve a math problem. He solved it again, under pressure, in front of a biased crowd, and still got it right. That's not just intelligence. That's resilience. People started to nod. A woman in the back stood slowly, then a man in a faculty blazer, then another, and then one by one more people began to stand. Mr. Holloway swallowed hard. Dr. Carter, I assure you— No, Dr. Carter said again, stepping forward. You don't assure me anything until I speak to the district. You'll be hearing from the school board, from our attorneys, and from the press. He turned back to his son. Elijah, come on, you're done here. Elijah stood, wiping his face. But before he left, he turned to the audience. His voice was small but firm. I just wanted to do math, he said. That's all. Then he followed his father out of the auditorium, leaving behind the trophy, the stage, and the people who couldn't see past the color of his skin. But what none of them knew was that Dr. Carter wasn't just a father. He was the new chairman of the state's Education Oversight Committee, and what happened next would ripple through every school in the district. The ride home that evening was quiet. Elijah sat in the passenger seat, his backpack on his lap, fingers curled tightly around the zipper. He stared out the window as the city passed by in streaks of warm gold and gray, sunlight glinting off. Glass buildings, sidewalks lined with kids heading home from after-school programs, traffic lights blinking like heartbeats at every corner. But inside Dr. Carter's silver SUV, there was no music, no chatter. Just a soft hum of wheels and something heavier, the weight of a truth that had long been buried and now had finally clawed its way back to the surface. Dr. Carter gripped the steering wheel with both hands. His jaw was clenched so tightly it looked carved from stone. Every now and then, he'd glance at his son from the corner of his eye, but he said nothing. Not yet. Elijah didn't cry anymore. He had cried enough on stage in front of people with cameras, teachers with tight-lipped stares, and students who once clapped for him but quickly pulled away when whispers of cheating began to float. He was tired of crying. He was tired of being tired. But above all, he was tired of trying to explain himself to people who never listened. It wasn't just the auditorium. It was the hallway stairs at school, the kids who said he was too smart to be normal, the neighbors who never waved at him the way they waved at other boys on the block, the teacher who once said, "You speak very well for where you're from," the librarian who followed him through the science aisle. It all came back, the whispers, the assumptions, the shrinking. And now, after everything, after solving every equation, practicing for weeks, dreaming of shaking hands with the math commissioner and holding that trophy, Elijah was reduced to a cautionary tale in the eyes of adults who didn't believe he belonged. As they turned onto their street, Dr. Carter finally spoke. "You shouldn't have had to go through that," he said, his voice low and steady. "Not today. Not ever." Elijah didn't answer. He just nodded slowly. They pulled into their driveway. The sun had dipped behind the trees now, casting long shadows over their front lawn. The house looked the same as it did every other evening, calm, still, safe. But tonight, everything felt different. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and lemon cleaner. Elijah went to his room, dropped his bag by the door, and laid on his bed without changing out of his blazer. He stared at the ceiling, arms spread, eyes open. He wasn't sleepy, he wasn't angry, he wasn't even sure what he was anymore. In the kitchen, Dr. Carter picked up the landline and dialed. His hands didn't shake. His voice didn't raise. But every word he spoke into the receiver had the sharpness of steel. "Melissa?" "Yeah, it's Henry. Something happened at the competition. I need to meet with the board." "No, not next week. Tomorrow morning. This needs to be addressed at the highest level." He hung up. Then he went to the hallway closet, pulled out a dusty black box from the top shelf, and carried it to Elijah's room. "Hey, champ," he said, knocking gently. "Can I come in?" Elijah sat up and nodded. Dr. Carter sat beside him and placed the box between them. "I want to show you something," he said. Inside the box were photographs, old documents, and a notebook wrapped in cracked leather. Elijah leaned in, curious. "These are stories, son," Dr. Carter said. "Our stories. Stories of people in this family who had to fight harder just to be seen as equal." He pulled out a black and white photo. A young man in a worn button-up shirt stood outside a school building, holding a torn notebook. A group of boys behind him were laughing, pointing at him. "That's your great-uncle Samuel," Dr. Carter said. "He was the first black student to attend Crestview High back in 1964. First day of school, they poured ink on his desk and wrote, 'Go home' on the chalkboard. But he didn't leave. He came back the next day, and the next, and the next. He graduated valedictorian. Elijah looked at the picture more closely. "He looks like me," he whispered. Dr. Carter smiled. "You're not wrong. He was quiet too, smart, kind. People told him he didn't belong, but he never let them decide his place." He took out another photo, this time of a young woman in scrubs, standing beside an old city hospital. "Your grandmother, Nurse Joanne Carter. She helped integrate the medical floor during the 70s. They wouldn't let her scrub in with the white nurses, made her clean beds and mop floors while she had her RN license framed at home. But she stayed. She saved lives. She taught young doctors how to treat people with dignity, no matter where they came from." Elijah touched the photo gently. "She died before I was born, right?" Dr. Carter nodded. "But her fire lives in you." He paused, then added, "Son, what happened to you today? It wasn't new. It wasn't your fault. And it wasn't about your answer being too perfect. It was about someone seeing your skin and deciding your talent didn't match their expectations." He let that sink in. "And the only way we beat that," he continued, "is by standing tall. Not just today, every day. Because people like us have been bending over backwards to prove ourselves for generations. But enough is enough." Elijah nodded slowly. "I didn't cheat, Dad," he said softly. Dr. Carter reached out and placed his hand on Elijah's shoulder. "I know, son. I never doubted it for a second." There was a long silence between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was healing, like the wind finally blowing through a sealed room. Then Dr. Carter added, "You know what Miss Langston and those judges need?" "What?" Elijah asked. "A lesson. And not the kind you get in a classroom, the kind you remember for the rest of your life." Elijah looked up, his eyes serious. "What are you going to do?" Dr. Carter gave a small smile. "You'll see. But just remember this, what they tried to take from you today, that joy, that pride, that light, they don't own it. You do." Elijah nodded again, slower this time, stronger. He didn't feel small anymore. The next morning, a storm rolled in, not just in the sky, but across the entire school district. Dr. Carter arrived at the Department of Education headquarters at 7:45 a.m. sharp. By 8, he was standing before a panel of 10 state officials, including the superintendent, the WAM Regional Ethics Chair, and 3 members of the district's Equity Council. The room was quiet, and all eyes were on him. "My name," he said, "is Dr. Henry Carter. I'm a father. I'm also the chairman of this district's oversight board. And yesterday, my son Elijah Carter was publicly accused of cheating at a math competition because he did something the people in charge didn't think he was capable of doing." Gasps echoed across the room. The officials leaned forward. They had seen the headlines. The incident had gone viral overnight. Someone had leaked a video from the auditorium. The clip of Elijah being forced to redo the problem had already been viewed 500,000 times. Dr. Carter continued. This wasn't just one teacher's prejudice. It was a system-wide failure. Judges didn't step in. Organizers didn't object. Administrators stayed silent. And the only reason this has come to light is because my son had the courage to speak the truth, even when no one else would. He dropped a thick file on the desk. "Inside this folder," he said, "are documented cases from the past 5 years. Reports from parents, teachers, and students who faced similar treatment. Dismissed, ignored, silenced. Today, that ends." He stood tall, his voice rising. "I am calling for a full audit of our competition procedures. Mandatory anti-bias training for all staff and faculty involved in student assessments, and a permanent review board to protect the rights of every student, regardless of color, class, or zip code." The panel was stunned, but none of them dared challenge him, because the storm wasn't just his to carry now. It had already spread to every classroom, every hallway, every student who'd ever been told they didn't belong. Meanwhile, at Willow Ridge, public school, Elijah walked through the doors with his backpack slung over one shoulder. The hallways were louder than usual. People looked at him differently. Some smiled, others nodded with admiration. Teachers whispered behind their clipboards. Someone had posted a printout of the news article on the hallway bulletin board. Accused genius fights back. Boy's father shakes school system with one speech. As Elijah passed by, he saw something new in the eyes of the students around him. Not pity, not confusion, but pride. Respect. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just the whispers anymore. It was a roar. It began with a phone call. Not the kind that ends in a soft apology and a promise to look into it, but the kind that silences rooms and sends secretaries scrambling from cubicle to cubicle, whispering that someone important is on the line. On Monday morning, just as the district's public relations office sat down for their weekly meeting, the main line rang, and the assistant communications officer picked it up, expecting another complaint about lunch prices or bus schedules. Instead, a calm, steady voice said, "This is Dr. Henry Carter. I suggest you connect me to the superintendent now." 5 minutes later, the district superintendent, Patricia Halden, was standing by her window, phone pressed to her ear, staring blankly at the city skyline beyond. Her office, once a place of quiet confidence and polished trophies, now felt like a courtroom. Dr. Carter's voice came through clear, cold, powerful. "Your entire education system just humiliated a gifted black child," he said. "And if you think this is going to blow over, you've underestimated the wrong family." Superintendent Halden didn't interrupt. She couldn't. She'd already seen the viral video from the auditorium. It had hit the district's email inboxes at midnight, followed by dozens of parent complaints, teacher resignations from the competition committee, and media inquiries from national outlets. A journalist from the New York Times had left 3 voicemails. One parent group had already started a petition. The headline on social media read, "Boy forced to prove intelligence twice because they didn't believe a black child could be a genius." Now the father of that child was on the phone, and his tone wasn't asking for an apology. It was demanding justice. "Dr. Carter," she finally began, her voice faltering, "I assure you, we are taking this matter very seriously." "You're late," Dr. Carter replied. "Too late for my son's dignity. Too late for the applause he never received. but not too late for consequences. The line went quiet for a beat. Then he added, "There will be a press conference at Willow Ridge Elementary at noon today. I will be addressing the public, the media, and most importantly, the students who watched their peer get publicly questioned, shamed, and doubted. You will be there." "Yes, of course." "And every school board member, every principal, from the participating schools and every judge from the math competition will attend as well, or I'll release the audio recording of my meeting with the ethics committee this morning where I named names." The call ended. Superintendent Halden slowly lowered the phone, her hand trembling slightly. Then she turned to her assistant and said only 2 words, "Clear everything." At precisely 11:47 a.m., the courtyard of Willow Ridge Elementary looked like the epicenter of a political campaign. A small wooden podium had been placed at the edge of the school garden, flanked by microphones from local and national news stations. Folding chairs lined the perimeter. School board officials, principals, reporters, and parents began to arrive one by one. Students peeked from classroom windows, whispering, "He's here! That's Elijah's dad!" A local pastor sat near the front, holding hands with Elijah's grandmother, who had flown in that morning wearing her Sunday best and a quiet storm in her eyes. At 11:59 a.m., Elijah stepped out of the school doors, walking beside his father. He wore the same blazer from the competition, but this time his chin was higher, and his eyes didn't avoid the crowd. Dr. Carter placed a hand on his son's back as they approached the podium. Cameras clicked. Reporters adjusted their microphones. Dr. Carter didn't look nervous. He looked ready. "Thank you for being here," he began, his voice calm but resonating like thunder wrapped in velvet. "This isn't a speech about politics or performance. This is about what happens when a system built to nurture children ends up crushing them instead." He paused, letting the silence settle. "My son Elijah Carter is 11 years old. He didn't commit a crime. He didn't break a rule. He solved a math problem, and because that problem was solved with excellence, speed, and confidence, it made adults in that auditorium uncomfortable. Instead of celebrating him, they put him on trial, publicly, on stage, like a criminal being, asked to confess." A collective breath moved through the crowd. "My son didn't lose his voice that day," Dr. Carter continued, "but your schools almost did." He gestured toward Elijah, who stood beside him, hands clasped, standing tall. This boy was given a test. He passed it. Then they gave him another. He passed that too. But the real test, the one he'll never forget, was being asked to prove his humanity in a room that had already decided he didn't belong. Heads bowed in shame. Teachers wiped their eyes, and then Dr. Carter dropped the truth no one was prepared for. "I'm not just his father. I'm also the newly appointed chair of the State Equity and Accountability Commission. And let me be very clear, this wasn't just a mistake. It was a mirror. One that reflected the hidden bias in our classrooms, our competitions, and our staff meetings." He held up a folder. "In here are 36 separate reports of discriminatory behavior from school staff, all buried, all ignored, and all involving Black and brown students being questioned, penalized, or dismissed for simply being excellent. That ends today." Gasps spread through the crowd like a spark in dry grass. He set the folder down on the podium. "Effective immediately," he said, "we're launching the largest anti-bias training initiative this state has ever seen. It will be mandatory. It will be thorough. And it will be public. Every school, every teacher, every judge." He looked into the cameras now. "And to the children watching this, yes, you. If you've ever been told you weren't smart enough, good enough, or worthy enough because of how you speak, how you dress, or the color of your skin, I want you to remember this moment, because from now on, you belong everywhere, in every classroom, on every stage, and at the winner's table." The applause erupted like thunder this time. Not polite, not rehearsed, but real, raw. Elijah stood taller as the cheers washed over him. He looked into the crowd and saw David, his best friend, clapping hard, tears in his eyes. He saw his math teacher, Mrs. Emery, beaming with pride. He saw students of all ages, black, white, brown, some cheering, some just staring with wide, eyes full of hope. Then he stepped up to the microphone himself. "I didn't come here to be famous," Elijah said. "I came here to do math, that's it. I studied, I practiced, I answered the question, and when they asked me to answer it, again I did. But no kid should have to do that just to be believed." He paused, then added quietly, "Genius doesn't look one way." Silence, and then a roar, applause that didn't stop for minutes, and in that moment, the system didn't just crack, it shattered. Later that evening, news stations around the country ran headlines like, "One Father, One Speech, How Elijah Carter Changed the Classroom Forever. From Humiliation to History. Elijah's Stand Becomes a National Movement. Dr. Henry Carter Sparks School Reform After Son's Math Competition Injustice." Parents sent in letters, teachers called to apologize. Elijah received hundreds of emails, some from students in other states, others from math teachers who said they'd changed their teaching methods because of him. But one email stood out. It was from a boy named Malik in Missouri. "I used to hide my math books because people teased me for being smart. But I saw you on the news. You made me feel brave. I'm going to enter the Math Bowl next month. Thank you for showing me I belong." Elijah read it 3 times. Then he looked up at his father across the dinner table and said, "Can I start tutoring kids at school? I think there's more Maliks out there." Dr. Carter smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "That's the real prize, son," he said. "Not a trophy, but using your voice to build something better." By the time the sun rose on Thursday morning, the city was different. Not because of an election, not because of a natural disaster, but because a little boy had stood up after being knocked down, and because his father knew how to turn pain into purpose. Across the district, school hallways were buzzing with conversation. Students debated what had happened to Elijah Carter. Teachers shared videos of Dr. Carter's press conference. Principals huddled in offices whispering the same words over and over. What will the board do next? That answer was coming sooner than anyone expected. At 10 a.m., in the district's main administrative building, a large, square structure that looked like it hadn't been painted since the 1980s, the largest school board meeting in recent history was about to take place. Usually those meetings were quiet affairs. A few parents, a handful of teachers, and rows of mostly empty seats. But today, the line to get inside stretched down the sidewalk. Camera crews set up outside. Security was doubled. Students from several schools had even taken permission slips to attend. Elijah's classmates came wearing shirts that said, "Believe Black. Brilliance." A group of girls from the debate team held signs that read, "Let him solve, not suffer." Inside the building, the boardroom itself had been rearranged. The long U-shaped table where the officials sat had nameplates polished, water bottles refreshed. On the wall behind them, the district's mission statement still hung proudly. Equity, excellence, empathy. Today, those 3 words would finally be put to the test. Elijah and his father entered quietly through the back. He didn't want to cause a scene, but heads turned anyway. People whispered, nudging one another as he walked to the front row, escorted by Mrs. Emery and his grandmother. He wore a simple black sweater, jeans, and his old backpack, still marked with pencil scuffs and a faded science fair pin. Dr. Carter took a seat beside his son, adjusted his cufflinks, and waited. At 10:01 a.m., the superintendent called the meeting to order. "We are here," she said, "to address an issue that has shaken our community, damaged our public trust, and reminded us that we still have a long way to go when it comes to justice in our schools." She didn't read from notes. She didn't hide behind a podium. Her voice was quiet, but her words were clear. This is not just about one child. It is about how we respond to the excellence of children who don't fit our expected mold. It's about the systems we create that allow bias to become normalized. She then turned toward the audience. Elijah Carter, will you please stand? Elijah stood slowly. You were wronged, the superintendent said. And I want to say, from this entire board, we are sorry. Applause rippled through the room. Elijah gave a small nod and sat back down. Then the board began the most extraordinary discussion in its history. First came the list of disciplinary actions. Miss Langston, the substitute teacher who accused Elijah, had already been barred from working at any public school in the state. Her teaching license was suspended indefinitely. Mr. Holloway, the lead judge, had submitted his resignation. The math competition committee was dissolved, and all members would be replaced with newly vetted, bias-trained educators. But Dr. Carter wasn't satisfied with just consequences. He wanted change. He stood and addressed the board directly. When my son was accused, no one stood up for him, he said. Not a single judge questioned the accusation. No teacher from other schools challenged it. He stood alone. He turned to the audience. Kids are watching us. And what we show them, today will teach them what they can expect from adults tomorrow. We must rebuild a system where intelligence isn't doubted just because it comes from a darker face. A board member raised her hand. She was a retired teacher, white-haired, with glasses that dangled from a chain around her neck. Dr. Carter, what would that system look like to you? Dr. Carter smiled gently. He had been waiting for that question. It begins with 4 things, he said. First, mandatory, in-depth anti-bias training for every employee in the district, not just once, but every year. Second, diverse judging panels in all academic competitions and student assessments. Third, anonymous scoring in math and science contests to eliminate visual bias. And fourth, student voice councils in every school, where students like Elijah can speak freely and be heard directly by school leadership. A few board members exchanged glances. One took notes furiously. Lastly, Dr. Carter added, I want the district to create an annual scholarship, named in honor of a child who was asked to prove himself twice, but only needed to once. He paused. Call it the Elijah Carter Award for Academic Integrity. The crowd burst into applause. Tears ran down Mrs. Emery's cheeks. David, Elijah's best friend, grinned from ear to ear and high-fived his neighbor. The principal from Elijah's school placed her hand over her heart and nodded proudly. The board members voted. Unanimously, all of Dr. Carter's proposals passed. The scholarship was approved, and the district, once slow to change, became a leader for others across the state. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Elijah sat on his bedroom floor, building a tower out of Legos. Not for a competition, not to prove anything, just for fun. His father walked in, leaned against the doorway, and smiled. You were amazing today, he said. Elijah shrugged. I didn't say much. You didn't have to, Dr. Carter replied. You've already said enough with your actions, with your strength. Elijah nodded, then hesitated. Dad? Yeah? Do you think I'll always have to do twice? As much just to be believed? Dr. Carter walked over, knelt down beside him, and helped attach another Lego brick. I hope not, he said. But until the world catches up, we'll keep building. One brick at a time. And we'll bring others. With us. The seasons changed slowly after that historic board meeting. Summer melted into autumn, and the crisp golden leaves of October began to dance down the sidewalks of Willow Ridge. Children started wearing jackets to school again. Classrooms smelled of sharpened pencils and pumpkin-scented hand sanitizer. But something was different now, something you couldn't touch or see, but that lived quietly in the walls, the air, the very spirit of the school. Willow Ridge wasn't just any elementary school anymore. It was the school where it happened. The school where a boy had been doubted and then believed, where a father had fought for justice not with fists or rage, but with calm, unwavering truth, where the truth had made noise, and that noise had changed everything. Elijah Carter returned to school a week after the board meeting, not to applause, not to a standing ovation, but to something far more powerful: respect. The stares were gone, the whispers had faded. And in their place, a quiet reverence followed him through the halls. Younger students smiled when they saw him. Older students nodded. Even the teachers seemed softer when they looked at him, as if they were no longer just looking at a student, but a reminder that brilliance can come from anywhere, from anyone. In the days that followed, something began to bloom inside Elijah, something even he couldn't quite explain. He no longer shrunk his voice in class. He no longer hesitated to raise his hand, even when the question was hard. And when students approached him with math questions, he didn't brush them off. He welcomed them. By November, Elijah had started something incredible. He called it Math Circle. It met every Wednesday after school in the library. At first, it was just him and David, his best friend. Then 2 third-grade girls joined, then a boy from another classroom. And then, one afternoon, Elijah walked into the library and found nearly 30 students sitting in a half circle, notebooks ready. They weren't there because of grades. They were there because of him, and not because he was a genius. But because he understood, he knew what it felt like to sit in the back of the room, afraid to speak. He knew what it meant to answer a question correctly, only to be asked, "Are you sure?" He knew what it meant to feel invisible, and how one act of kindness or cruelty could change everything. So he made the math circle a place where no one felt invisible, where wrong answers weren't laughed at, and every raised hand was treated like it mattered. One day near Thanksgiving, a boy named Malik stayed after the session. He was in 4th grade, quiet, shy. He tugged at Elijah's sleeve and whispered, "Thanks for today. My teacher says I'm too much when I answer fast. But in here, you don't make me feel bad." Elijah smiled and simply said, "That's because you're not too much. You're just you." Meanwhile, the Elijah Carter Award for Academic Integrity was already making waves. Every school in the district now had a wall where student achievements were celebrated, not just for perfect scores, but for perseverance, for leadership, for helping others learn. Monthly spotlights included students who overcame personal loss, language barriers, or quiet self-doubt. Elijah was named the first recipient of the award. But when he stood in front of the crowd to accept it, he asked to share it with everyone. "Who's ever been told they don't belong?" he said into the microphone, standing straight and brave in front of cameras and faculty. "This award isn't about me. It's about what happens when people finally listen." The crowd didn't clap right away. They stood, a full standing ovation. It wasn't just for the boy. It was for the shift he'd caused. Back home, life remained beautifully normal. Dr. Carter still worked long hours. Grandma still cooked too much food. Elijah still had to do the dishes and finish his chores. But there were new things, too. Mail came every week. Letters from parents, kids, teachers, even a professor at MIT who offered Elijah a summer scholarship. When he turned 15, one envelope came from a school in Tennessee. A girl named Alana had written, "After seeing what happened to you, I stopped hiding my report card from my parents. I thought being smart wasn't cool. But now I know it's powerful." Another came from an elderly man named Leonard who wrote, "I'm 76. I watched your father speak on the news. I lived through segregation, marched in the 60s, and cried when I saw you speak. You reminded me that the fight still matters, and that we're winning." Elijah read each one carefully. He kept them in a shoebox under his bed. Not as trophies, but as proof. Proof that words matter. That actions matter. That courage, even when quiet, can echo for generations. And though not everyone changed overnight, something permanent had cracked. At the next regional math competition for the first time in district history, the judging Panel was made up of educators from 6 different ethnic backgrounds, 2 women scientists, and a university math professor who had spent her career mentoring underserved kids. When a young Latina girl named Sophia aced the final problem in record time, no one questioned her. They clapped. They handed her the trophy, and her eyes found Elijah in the crowd, sitting beside David and cheering loudly. He gave her a proud nod. She smiled back, because now she belonged, and she knew it. That winter, as snow dusted the rooftops of Willow Ridge and Christmas lights blinked softly in the quiet night, Elijah sat by the window, holding a mug of hot chocolate. Grandma sat in her rocker humming an old hymn, and Dr. Carter was finally resting, reading a novel he'd been too busy to open for months. "Dad," Elijah said, Do you think things will really stay different, Doctor?" Carter looked at his son, then set the book down. "I think change is like a wheel," he said. "It doesn't roll fast at first, but every time someone pushes it forward, it moves farther than before." Elijah nodded thoughtfully. "I think we pushed it, didn't we?" Dr. Carter smiled. "You didn't just push it, Elijah. You reminded it why it needs to keep moving." Outside, the snow kept falling softly, quiet, gentle, but endless. And inside the hearts of the students at Willow Ridge, of kids across the state, something brighter than snow was falling too. Hope, the kind that sticks, the kind that never melts.